Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure Red Jack, a Gothic Earth Adventure, designed by MT Black for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to Platinum patrons Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, and Rivzung, and Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Mark Ilstead, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. I am not super into the Jack the Ripper mythos. I've obviously heard of it. It is part of our shared pop culture at this point. I'm also not entirely familiar with the Gothic Earth setting, which is where this adventure takes place. From what I understand, it is Earth, but with magic, and can be played in with D&D rules, so everybody has firearms. It's turn of the century, by that I mean 19th century, 19th to 20th century, I guess, which is where the Jack the Ripper murders took place. And I'm getting very much like an Arkham Horror, you know, Cthulhu vibe setting off this, where it's like a period piece, real world, but there's some underlying supernatural machinations going on, which it does kind of set that up. What this is a level 1 adventure that doesn't seem to actually have anything to do with Jack the Ripper. It's just very much in that same vein with the same theme. So it's got a serial killer, it's got a murder investigation, Sherlock Holmes is the quest-giving NPC for your party. It's very short, very straightforward and simple, which is all kind of a little bit of a downbeat for a murder mystery. I feel like you can do shorter murder mysteries, but there's just not a whole lot of nifty twists and turns and red herrings and things of that nature here. It's mostly just talking to people, and then you get to the final location that you need to go to, talk to that person, and then the actual killer just ends up manifesting, and you have to battle them in the end. So I like the idea here. I think the theme is pretty fun. I wasn't super impressed with the adventure itself, however. So let's go into Red Jack. I'm not sure what this Mask of the Red Death is either. There's a really, really gorgeous cover, by the way. Oliver Clegg, I believe, designed it. Absolutely amazing looking. But nowhere, as far as I know, this is not like the subtitle or anything, so I'm not sure if this is part of a bigger series, Mask of the Red Death. And as I said, you know, Red Jack obviously is referencing Jack the Ripper, and there's apparently a entity called the Red Death, which manifests itself and is this kind of evil, overarching force that's behind all the badness, I guess. None of that really plays into this adventure, however, so it's a cool cover, but this is actually kind of a different thing. It does have a nice little explanation about Gothic Earth, which is cool because, again, I wasn't really aware of how this goes down or how this works. I'm aware of, obviously, you can play D&D in different kinds of settings, and of course use things like firearms and whatnot. Sanity is also, I believe, a thing in the Dungeon Master's Guide in 5th edition, so you can certainly use that. This does a very, very quick, easy job of explaining how those systems work in this universe. Unfortunately, none of which actually come into play in this adventure. For example, Sanity, you would roll a saving throw, you add your proficiency and either your wisdom or charisma bonus, you can actually choose, and if you fail, you gain a short-term madness, and if you fail 2 or more of those within the single adventure, then you gain an indefinite madness condition, so compounding madness from Sanity. And magic is invisible unless you can also cast magic, because there's a whole nother like ethereal realm that doesn't really, you know, it's the way magic works, I guess, in our quote-unquote real world, the urban magicness of it all. And also you have to roll a sanity saving throw anytime you cast a spell of 1st level or higher, which means magic is more dangerous and more rare in this world, which I think is pretty cool, although in this case, unless any PC actually casts magic spells, it doesn't come into play. And Firearms Armor does nothing against them, which in this case I really like the way it's a very simple fix. So Firearms, if you have proficiency in ranged martial weapons, then you have proficiency in firearms. replaces like things like archery fighting style is just shooting. The mechanics remain the same, and then to translate the fact that armor basically doesn't do anything against firearms. In this case, people aren't wearing bulletproof vests; they're just wearing like leather jackets, which isn't going to stop a bullet. You get a +2 to your attack roll to reflect the advantage. So I like those rules. That's very nice and simple way to translate, and maybe that's probably part of the advantage of 5th edition in general, is just how malleable the rule set is to apply to these different settings, which is pretty cool to see. You can see it's a very plain black and white layout. It does have some nifty font at the top. I'm not really going to actually... I usually complain about this because it's become more of a standard to create a nicer looking presentation and layout, and a lot of creators go into a lot of work and painstaking time to create a really beautiful layout. But I think this one actually kind of fits. I actually dig the black and white layout because it looks, and it's got the kind of the cool art to reflect that kind of, you know, late 1800s, early 1900s style London, with those kind of characters and that kind of like, what do you call that? You know, where you take the like chalk and you rub it, like a rubbing kind of a look to it. It actually works kind of well for me, and I like it. So I'm not gonna complain too much about it, but it is definitely a more of a printer-friendly kind of layout here. You do get summoned to the famous 221B Baker Street, home of Sherlock Holmes, and he is the quest giver. He tells you that there is a woman that has been murdered in near Whitechapel, and you have to investigate it for some hand-wavy reason. He's off doing more important things, and your characters are not really determined why they're being hired as investigators, why they trust each other, why they know each other. All that is kind of hand-waved away in terms of like, this is your, you know, do you guys want to play the adventure or not? Because you're showing up at Sherlock Holmes' house and you are being put as official private investigators into this grisly murder of a prostitute that was found killed, violently murdered. And you're given essentially 2 places to go. You can either go to the murder scene, which has since been mostly cleaned up, or you can go to her where the woman lived. And from there, there are a few different areas that you can basically continue to go on, and you talk to people. And that's basically the entire adventure. You're just talking to people. There's maybe a few charisma checks and insight checks to see if they're lying. There might be a perception check near the murder scene to see that there was a occult symbol being drawn, and you can talk to the strange woman that drew it, and she says maybe there's some spirit stuff involved. You can talk to the police, who can mention the fact that the body was mutilated in a certain way, none of which actually plays into the adventure, strangely. The entire point of it is to basically lead you to the doctor that this woman has been recently visiting, and when you go to the doctor, the clinic has been shut down, so you have to then go to his house. And meanwhile, you're learning the fact that all the murder victims lately, this has been a string of serial murders, have been, the one thing that ties them all together is this doctor's office. So that's obviously a huge clue that something's up there. And the closest thing the adventure gets to maybe like a red herring is to paint the doctor as the actual killer, when in fact it turns out it is his deceased wife. They had a falling out, marital problems, they couldn't bear children, and he was treating a lot of working women, and she was growing very jealous, had a drug addiction. He treated her like crap. It was just a bad situation. She eventually was driven to suicide, but her spirit lingered on as a ghostly entity that then went around and I guess possessed different like street urchin kind of thing and murdered his clients out of jealousy. So that's kind of a nifty little build up and backstory. I think that was neat, but the actual way that you get there, it just feels a little too simple and straightforward. Like you get to the house. Let's see if there's a nice, there we go. I like this map too. You get to the doctor's house, you confront him, and he is very open about everything. And instead of it even being a string of like checks or something to see if he's like lying or hiding something, he just kind of opens up about the fact that, and you're supposed to like draw attention to the fact that he's got this urn here, and hopefully the players ask about it. But as this conversation is going on, this urn just starts rattling and rattling until finally she manifests as a ghost and just attacks the players. That's very, I mean, it kind of leads to a climax in the one battle of the entire little adventure, is this ghost pops out and you have to fight her. But it also feels a little too easy, and I get that it's it's difficult to condense a murder mystery into like a 2 or 3 hour D&D session, which is what this is designed for, as a single session adventure. That can be very tricky. And but the fact that we're not doing a whole lot of combat, we're only talking to people, I feel like there could have been a better opportunity for you know, somebody else that maybe was like a shifty character that was around. You know, maybe he was you know, had beat the woman or something. You know, something that would have painted this other person as a killer. Maybe it was shady, but it didn't have anything to do with it. There could have been some cool, some more interesting branching paths that could have kept in the theme of a very classic like serial murder mystery and still kept things short, but made things just a little more complex to where the players have to just work a little bit harder instead of just talking to like what amounts to 3 or 4 people. Like, they do have the option to go and dig up the body and investigate it. It's already been buried after they talk to the police officer, and they gain no new information there. Even the thing about like the missing, they talk to the police officer and it says that her thumb has been missing. Deep wounds on her torso, cut throat, and a missing thumb. And that has nothing to do with anything. There's no like mark of like how the people are killed, or there's no point to that. So it just feels very, it feels very odd, because those are kind of clues that players don't want to keep up with and get into the theme of the murder. So I just found, I found the theme very cool and evocative. It's very, it is well written. I was really getting into it, but just the ending felt a little too simple and almost anticlimactic, even though it involves a fight with a ghost. Which, a ghost, it does mention it is a 22 hit point ghost, because that's about half hit points. This is a level 1 adventure. Ghosts are a CR4 enemy, which, as far as I can understand from the way D&D is balanced, quote unquote, that means like one ghost is more or less balanced for a level 4 party. So a level 1 party, even a half health ghost, is pretty strong. It's one hit from a ghost will down any party member, so that can be pretty scary. It's got its horrifying visage that can deal damage, or that can, I guess, paralyze, and it has damage resistance to any non-magical. And obviously, if you're starting this adventure at level 1, you don't have any magical equipment, so that makes things pretty interesting. And from when I looked, there are pre-generated characters included. They all have really low AC, for example, because people don't usually wear, you know, breastplates in Earth time at this point. So it's an interesting choice for a battle. It is very thematic that she appears and attacks, but it's weird that she comes, that she appears during this conversation instead of maybe triggering from something like maybe the players threaten him and try to arrest him because he's being shady about it and he doesn't really know what's going on. That might make more sense, that she comes out to like defend her husband, because ultimately she still has this twisted relationship with him and she's still kind of protecting him. She, you know, she hasn't murdered him, she's murdering all the clients that she's jealous of, kind of a thing. So maybe that makes more sense. It just felt all a little bit too easy and straightforward for what the adventure was trying to set up initially, and just kind of falls flat a bit in the end, which is a bummer. And I get that it's trying to do a murder mystery in a fairly quick, condensed fashion, but I think it loses a bit of the interesting plot threads that it was trying to create in being a little too straightforward, a little too easy. There's not a whole lot of characters to talk to, and otherwise that is the complete adventure. There's no maps involved, and normally I would balk at no maps, but there's really no reason to have a map either, except for that final, you know, I guess it'd be nice to have one of this living room where the ghost fight takes place, but otherwise you really don't need a map here. It's a collection of NPCs that you're talking to with occasional skill checks, and there are a few options for players to go to in terms of talking to, you know, they can visit the murder site, they can see the occult symbol that doesn't really lead anywhere, talk to the spirit lady doesn't really lead anywhere. All they might learn is that there might be something supernatural going on here, which they can probably infer already is the case. I don't know, it's a very simple through line that I was ultimately disappointed with, despite enjoying the actual theme that's presented here. I did like the handouts. It comes with this map handout, both that has the locations on it and the non-locations, and I like this map. I think it's very thematic. It looks like a map that has been folded and kind of faded a little bit. I actually would prefer, if I was using the map in an actual like handout, I would go ahead and give them this map. Well, it'd probably give them this map at first, and then once they learn the locations, maybe learn this map or use this as the DM map and then write those locations on here, because I think it does help to pinpoint the characters. Okay, where have you been and what have you done and what do you still need to do? That almost works as a good quest journal, as like a series of locations, for example. And then this is a really cool addition here, is like a newspaper clipping that has information about the actual murder taking place. That's an awesome way to start the adventure, is to hand out this player handout. We also get, as kind of a bonus, which I love that it's like printer friendly, you could sit there and cut these out, 4 characters that we could play. Level 1, and they are set up with their firearms already, as well as backgrounds, which is kind of cool. They all have backgrounds where you grew up in London, or you're a member of the Queen's Regiment, or you're a wizard, part of Cambridge. That's pretty cool, because probably, most likely, players do not have characters who are ready to go in a Gothic Earth Adventure yet. Even if you would transfer your characters over, there would be some changes that would have to be made. For example, having the right money, and the fact that most characters carry firearms and not weapons. Although I do find it odd that there is a barbarian who carries a revolver and a greatsword. So maybe I don't picture the Gothic Earth setting. Maybe it's a little more D&D-ish than I realized. We also get a nice little list of a table of names, because you can make your own names here. But it's a nice little bonus that I enjoyed. But otherwise, I have kind of mixed feelings about the adventure in general. So let's go over my pros and cons for Red Jack. Pros: I did like the simple, easy-to-use rules for Sanity, Magic, and Firearms. Whenever I look at something that converts, D&D into something else, especially if it's not like a full-blown, gigantic thing. This is just a very, very short one-shot session that probably a lot of groups would just play as a one-shot. Be like, hey, here's the situation. We're going to play in Earth times, but it's kind of an evil, darker, supernatural version of Earth during this period piece. And then here are the only like 2 or 3 different rules that actually change from what we're used to playing in D&D 5e, and it works very well here. Pro: I like that we get 4 pre-generated characters to quickly jump into the action, because again, I would imagine most groups don't already have a Gothic Earth party ready to go. And pro: I did enjoy the player handouts for the Whitechapel area and the newspaper clipping. Very cool handouts. Cons: I kind of just wrapped up all my complaints into one big con, which is that it's a little too short and simplistic for a Sherlock Holmes style Jack the Ripper murder mystery. I just found the actual plot started off really cool. I like the hook, but the way it basically just amounts to talking to a bunch of people, and really there's only like 3 or 4 people you have to talk to, and there's no real like red herrings, or if there are things that just kind of die off and don't have a really satisfying conclusion to where things wrap up. And then the actual final confrontation just felt way too easy, where it's like, okay, I'm just now getting to where I'm learning more about this adventure, and oh, there's the killer, just pops up and attacks us, and then we can defeat the killer, and it's all said and done. It was just disappointing overall. Final verdict: the Gothic Earth setting is intriguing, but by condensing a murder mystery into a single short session, Red Jack loses a bit of its thematic flair. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.